and health issues. So we have, this is, I don't actually know which number it is in our series, but there's been many of them. We've been offering them about bi-weekly for the past few months, and on different topics. And today we are focusing on how to keep people housed during this pandemic, and really trying to understand what are the legal ramifications right now with evictions, what resources are available, and what advocacy efforts are underway to really help make sure that people are able to stay housed and are not becoming homeless as a result of this crisis. So just a few housekeeping items. So we have 3 wonderful speakers who are going to do a brief presentation, and then we're going to have a lot of time for your questions. So please, as you think of them throughout the presentation, or as we near the midway point, please feel free to enter your questions into the chat box, and we will be monitoring those, and then we'll open them up. So we'll save all the questions until all the panelists have spoken, and then we will proceed with a Q&A. So you can go ahead and do that through the chat box. There's also a Q&A box. Either one is fine. And the presentation is being recorded and will be shared with all of you, as well as posted on our website for anyone who's not able to attend this morning. I think, are there any other housekeeping items that I'm forgetting, Amy or Harmony?
No, I think that's good. I would also just add, we'll, at the very end, we'll also have a link to our evaluation. It's very hard to get people to fill these out in this virtual age, but it's super important for us, not only just for learning what is helpful to everybody for these town halls, but being able to show any kind of impact of what we're doing. So we'd really appreciate it if people would take a second to fill it out at the end.
Absolutely, thank you. I forgot the most important thing, really, because it's also an opportunity for you to let us know what other information and topics you'd like us to cover. You know, we are really responsive. We're just kind of doing this on the fly, so it's what you tell us you need that we then go ahead and pursue and try to make happen. So we really, really encourage you to fill out those evaluations so that we can make sure that we're getting you, all of you on the front lines, the information that you need to support your patients and clients. So with that, I would like to introduce our panelists. I'm going to introduce everyone at once, and then we will go through. So we have Aissatou Berry, a staff attorney from the Legal Aid Society's General Housing Unit in the Bronx Neighborhood Office, where she represents tenants in non-payment and holdover housing proceedings. Aissatou has been representing tenants at the Legal Aid Society since 2017 and was a 2019 Jonathan Lippman Access to Justice Fellow before joining Legal Aid. Aissatou brought lawsuits against the NYPD and police misconduct claims throughout New York City. And she's also done some trainings for us. So if you've ever attended one of our preventing evictions trainings or holdover trainings, Aissatou has done those for us, and we're very grateful. Sia Weaver is the campaign coordinator for Housing Justice for All, a statewide coalition of over 100 organizations that represent tenants and homeless New Yorkers in their struggle for housing as a human right. In 2019, she coordinated the campaign to pass the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act of 2019. We are really looking forward to hearing from Sia about what advocacy efforts they are organizing through Housing Justice for All to protect New Yorkers, and especially how you all can get involved. And then we have Dana Guyet is the director of the HRA, that's Human Resources Administration, Prevention and Community Support Unit, which is responsible for oversight and support of the Homebase network of community homelessness prevention programs. Dana managed the prevention unit at DHS and helped to facilitate the transition of the unit to HRA. She manages oversight of home-based programming, development of policy and procedure, quality assurance and special projects, and implementation of new initiatives and programs. The PCS unit provides technical support to home-based programs, including coordination within HRA units to ensure positive outcomes for New York City community residents, with the focus on maintaining housing stability. We really always want to give you resources that are currently available for the folks that you serve. And so if you're not familiar with the home-based program, you will know more about it after today, as well as some updates. So we are very grateful to our panelists for shedding light on this really important topic. This is a really unsettling time. And so with that, I will hand it over to Aissatou.
Thank you, Bonnie. So I'm going to share my screen now so that I can show you a one-pager that we will be sharing with everyone. We hope to have it in different languages in the future so that we can also just provide this access to all New Yorkers. Okay, so I practice in the Bronx Housing Court, but I'll also provide the phone number for Brooklyn Housing Court in the chat. The Bronx Housing Court is open. The phone number is 718-466-3022. The main site for the Bronx Housing Court is 1118 Grand Concourse. At 851 Grand Concourse, NYCHA cases are heard, but trials are also heard. So here's what I'm gonna say. Things are changing every day. Unfortunately, it's with the law, it feels like a lot of catch up. So we are evolving our practice along with the ways that the government is evolving their response to COVID, along with the ways that the courts are evolving their response to COVID. Unfortunately, right now, the courts are not doing a great job. There are no defaults for court appearances, but courts are gradually doing more. I've been having virtual court appearances, which means that I use Skype for Business to appear in front of the judge. Right now, people have been getting trials scheduled, which is unnerving because a result of trial can ultimately possibly lead to an eviction. Gratefully, there are no defaults. So that means if someone does not appear for a court appearance, they will have no negative effect on them. There's no possibility of eviction. I would say if someone does receive any type of papers saying that they should go to court, they should talk to an attorney immediately, even if they don't ultimately decide to go with an attorney. The easiest way to get in contact with a housing advocate, which is a housing attorney or a paralegal, is to call 311. A lot of the organizations right now are staffing a 311 hotline where we answer questions for individuals, no matter their income, who normally live within the 5 boroughs, but I've answered questions for people in the surrounding suburbs as well about housing issues. So I would say if anyone has any concern about any housing issue, particularly if they do receive a notice to go to court, it's important that they call 311 and speak to someone who might give them more information because, as I said before, the information is always changing. So there are no evictions without a court case. No one can get evicted without having been to court. If someone has lived somewhere for at least 30 days, whether or not they're the tenant of record, whether or not they're the ones who signed the lease, or they're the ones who are just a roommate, excuse me, if they're a grandparent, if they're just a relative, if they just stayed there longer than they thought they would, if someone has been somewhere for 30 days, they cannot get evicted from that place without a court case. Anyone who received an eviction notice already before March 16th, 2020 needs to be served a new notice after August 5th, 2020. So right now, we're using August of 2020 as a benchmark to say this is the day, after this day, evictions can start on weekdays from 9 to 5. That is just what we know right now. Information has not changed, but it is ever changing. It's evolving all the time. A new notice may come after August 5th, and if that person does receive a new notice, I would caution them to speak with an attorney immediately. Anyone, so tenants, because the courthouse is open, tenants and tenant groups can file non-emergency cases. And this is a new development. Before, when the courthouses were much more limited in what they were able to do, tenants could file emergency cases. This is still the case. So an emergency case is normally an illegal lockout. That's when someone is locked out of their apartment without permission from a judge. and without an eviction notice. So because after March 16th, the marshals were no longer evicting, anyone who has been evicted or kicked out of their apartment after March 16th was illegally locked out. So an illegal lockout can be the landlord changes the keys, the landlord turns off the gas, the landlord turns off the light, the landlord makes the apartment inaccessible for the person inside. And like I said before, evictions aren't only for tenant of records, they can also be for a roommate. So if another roommate changes the keys, if another roommate basically makes the apartment or the room inaccessible for the person who lives there. An online tool that people can use to fill out a request for an emergency case is at justfix.nyc. And if you just Google that, they'll basically take you through the process of filling those forms out. A person can also go in person to the housing court. However, I do not condone that at all. I do not support that at all. And these cases are being referred. So a lot of the cases that we have right now are cases where there are illegal lockouts and emergency repairs happening. So people are still getting evicted, unfortunately. So it's important that individuals can be referred to legal services for free representation, but they can also receive advice if they think that they may have everything under control. So there are a couple of protections. I say that term loosely because they're not necessarily adequate protections for individuals who are in threat of eviction. So just today, HCR COVID Rent Relief Program began. So the application is today, July 16, 2020 through July 30th, 2020. So the window to apply is only 2 weeks. It's specifically for New York State residents. So it applies to everyone throughout New York State. And I put the website on the handout for more information, but essentially the requirements for the program are before March 31st, the household's income was less than the average median income of the, was less than the average median income of the area. And second qualification is that they must be paying over 30% of the household income for rent. And the third qualification is that they must have had financial hardship from April 1st onward. So it's a little difficult for us for me, who represents tenants who are low income, to qualify for that type of relief, but I'm sure there is a category of individuals that do qualify for this. The time period is extremely limited, but I believe that there will be tenants in New York State who will qualify for it. There's also the CARES Act. So it's a part of the federal package that went out earlier during quarantine. And essentially any federally funded building or landlord cannot start a case from March 27th through July 25th. And after July 25th, they have to send a 30-day notice to start a housing case. So there's a long list of buildings that fit under this criteria, and I put the website for the building in the handout. But also, if I put a couple of examples, NYCHA cannot start a case without a 30-day notice after July 25th. Anyone who receives, so let's say, for example, there's a building of 20 units, and in one of those units, someone receives Section 8. No one in that entire building can receive a notice until July 26, 2020. So it is vast, and it includes a lot of a lot of landlords and buildings within the New York City area. However, this is only for cases that are starting, not for cases that have already started. So its influence is limited in that sense. There's also an executive order that provides some assistance through security deposits. So tenants, after Executive Order 202.28 was passed, tenants can use their security deposits for rent, but the landlords cannot force them. So we know that, well, landlords do like to harass their tenants. Landlords, especially the smaller landlords who are having difficulty with making payments, might encourage their tenants to use their security deposits for rent. It is solely the tenant's decision. However, if the tenant does decide to do this, the repayment must begin within 90 days of the use. So repayment has to be at least 1/12 of the total of the security deposit each, excuse me, each month. If a landlord decides that, if a tenant misses a payment, the tenant can be sued in what we call a holdover proceeding, which is a payment for the tenant doing or not doing something. So while this is an option for the tenant to use their security deposit to pay off the rent that they've owed, if they haven't paid off the security deposit in a timely fashion, they can be in an eviction case, in a case that might lead to an eviction if they don't do that. Excuse me. The last thing I want to talk about is the New York Safe Harbor Act. So the New York Safe Harbor Act protects tenants from getting evicted if they only owe rent in a certain period of time. So the rent period is March 7th, 2020 through the end of quarantine in the specific county, right? So it's through the end of the phases. Clearly, maybe a county in upstate may have a shorter time frame than New York City does, but it's essentially March 7th through the end of the quarantine. So landlords can start a new housing court case, and tenants can answer remotely. So they can call the housing court and either answer through their system, or they might create another system. That's something that's also fluid at this time. But tenants can answer from home, but should speak with a legal service provider first, because an answer is a legal document, and they will be making certain types of assurances in that answer. So if one of the tenant's defenses from receiving a new housing court case is that they were unable to pay rent because of a financial hardship, then it's the tenant's responsibility to prove that they're unable to pay rent due to a financial hardship. And the financial hardship does not have to be COVID-19 related. For example, if someone is receiving only SSI or SSD, they are on a fixed income, and all of these additional expenses come up during COVID-19, and they're unable to pay their portion of the rent due to that. That qualifies as a financial hardship that prevented them from paying their rent. If they are receiving public assistance, that qualifies. So it's not necessarily just I got fired, or I couldn't work because I had to do childcare. It can also just be generally, and I encourage my coworkers to be creative with the reasons why financial hardship has come up, because there are different life circumstances that the court does not take into consideration. And unfortunately, the tenant must prove in this situation, but that also gives the opportunity to be not creative, but just over-inclusive of the actual things that affect low-income individuals' lives. So if the tenant is able to prove financial hardship, then only a money judgment and not an eviction, not a judgment of possession, will be issued. So A money judgment is not that great either. It's essentially saying that this individual owes this amount of money, and there are steps that the landlord can take to have that money judgment issued, to take that money away from the tenant who is on the case. So this Safe Harbor Act is limited in protecting people who only owe rent after March 7th for now. If rent is owed before March 7th or after the quarantine ends, an eviction is possible. So if the amount of rent that's owed is from February 1st through October 1st and quarantine ends in September, that amount that's owed in February and October can make an individual possibly get an eviction in the end. So things are changing, things are evolving. I would say that the courts aren't necessarily responding well. We're doing our best to advocate. I have coworkers who have trials scheduled for October, and they are being told that they may be in person. However, we're trying to just make sure that that doesn't happen. So I look forward to answering your question.
Great, thank you so much, Aissatou. A lot of information to process. Just a reminder, we will be sharing that one pager as well as all the other materials and recording of this presentation within the next day or two. So you will be getting that. All right, I want to quickly hand over to Dana Guyet from HRA to talk about what resources are available.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. If you want to put the slides, you're welcome to do that. I'm looking at them on another computer, Bonnie, so I just figured I'd have them on the side. But those can be distributed as well.
Would you like to share your screen?
Well, I'm working off of, let me see, I would have to email them to myself really quickly because I'm doing this on I'm not doing this on the same computer where I have them. But okay. I could do that while I get started talking. And I can talk through them and people can have, I can just let everybody know that I have slides that I can send to you so you don't have to worry about taking all the minutia down in terms of, in terms of the details of the programming.
Great.
So I'm just going to quickly attach them to myself and then I can try to get the screen sharing working.
If not, I can pull them up. I have them here, so I can.
There you do? Okay, so that's
you go ahead and I'll pull them up when I got it.
Okay. All right. So, some of you may know about Homebase, but I'm going to go through some of the general information so that if people are not familiar, they'll get the baseline. Homebase is a homelessness prevention program. It's a network across the 5 boroughs. We have 26 locations across the city, and we serve in the range of 28,000 people across the year, across all of those locations at different levels of service depending on their need. So the main purpose of Homebase is to prevent people from entering shelter. They do community-based prevention work, as well as rental assistance, meaning that they're working with clients in the community who are living in the community, living in some sort of housing, and helping them to address any housing issues they have. We have some special programs, such as one at Rikers Island, where we have Homebase co-located on Rikers Island to support people who are returning to the community. We also have programs at DHS intake sites for diversion to look at options to assist people to stay in the community versus entering shelter. And we do aftercare support. So Homebase is the primary aftercare program for people who have been in a New York City homeless shelter and are returning to the community, leaving the shelter, entering housing in the community. So there's a list here in the slides of some of the general services Homebase provides. One of the big areas is eviction prevention and short-term emergency funding. They assist people to obtain public benefits. They're not the direct, they don't provide benefits, and they don't directly manage it, because all of that's through the city, but they can assist people in those applications and any issues with that process. They can provide financial counseling. They address landlord and tenant or family mediation issues. They link people to various services they may need. And they are also the primary source of assessment and submission of applications for people in the community looking to be considered for rental assistance. In general, Homebase is the payer of last resort. So while Homebase can directly provide financial assistance, they have to always ensure that people first seek other financial grants, particularly through HRA. And we'll talk a little bit more about that further on, because I know that you want to hear a little bit about how people can get financial assistance, but particularly with arrears through the HRA job centers, people can request grants to help pay arrears. Sometimes they'll need other supports in addition to HRA, and Homebase can be one of those supports. And then in addition, Homebase can provide financial support for things that aren't covered under the HRA spectrum of financial grants. So what's most valuable about the Homebase funding is that they have more flexibility. So I'll give you a brief overview of the eligibility. We serve people in sort of all categories. So we're working with families with children, we work with adult families, and we work with single adults. There are some differences in eligibility depending on which group the client or household is. But there's general eligibility requirements for the program, and they relate to income, risk of homelessness, and whether people have public benefits. So for prevention cases, which means people who are in the community and are looking for support, we have different thresholds for income. And for aftercare, the primary criteria is that somebody has exited from a DHS shelter with some type of rental assistance or subsidized housing, like NYCHA or Section 8. Or they're in the community with rental assistance. So there are some people who receive rental assistance not through the shelter, but just through the community. So anyone who has rental assistance, regardless of how they got it, would be considered aftercare. Just a note that if people are not eligible for home-based services, they should be provided resources that may be useful to them, even though Homebase may not be able to enroll them. So we can move to the next slides. So we have a few different service levels, just to give you a sense that there is a spectrum of need of what clients presenting to Homebase are looking for. And so our housing advice and assistance service is a more brief, quick service where someone might not meet the full eligibility criteria, or they may have a minimal need, and Homebase can provide them assistance and resources without the need for ongoing services. We have our standard full service case level, and that's people who meet the full criteria for eligibility. They have met the criteria for some level of risk of housing instability, and Homebase will support them around what they need to address that crisis or that risk. And then the intensive level is, in addition to what might fall under the full service, there's a recognition that there's more comprehensive needs for ongoing services and more intensive types of supports. And so in these cases, Homebase can work with these clients for longer than the time frame that's typically allowed through our funding structure for the full service. In the slides, there is a map, and it has a list of all the Homebase agencies and locations. Further in the slides, I have a link to the website. I do recommend that people use the HRA website in general. There's a lot of resources there, and I think people don't often think to go there to get information. But also on the website, we have a lot of information about Homebase, and we have an updated locator that allows someone to plug in their zip code and find their local Homebase site. So this map is fine, but all this information is on the website. And if for any reason any of the information on this map were to change, it would be updated and current on the website. So in terms of connecting with Homebase, as I mentioned, we have a map and information on the HRA website, and 311 is always a good resource if somebody calls and what they indicate fits into Homebase's service area in terms of a risk of housing instability. They will be connected to, they will be given information for the Homebase service provider that serves their area. Something to be mindful of is that the way the Homebase services are structured is that different agencies have contracts for different service areas via zip code. So for us, the zip code is really how we determine which location someone would be referred to. So if you're ever looking to get assistance around referring someone for Homebase, it's really helpful to have their full address as well as their zip code. We always recommend, I mean, right now, Homebase did a really great job of shifting very quickly with the pandemic and moving to virtual, online, phone-based services. So they have stayed open. They're not doing a lot of in-office work with clients, although they've all kept some capacity for their offices to be open. So if someone really needed to deliver something to them or pick something up, they were able to do that. But they've worked really hard to provide services to people remotely. So they are doing things via phone. People can send them via email. They can send them documents. They can take pictures and send them documents. They're using online systems for signatures. They're doing video calls and video visits. So they've really been able to keep servicing even new clients as well as their previously existing clients throughout this process. And some of as I said, they do have staff still in the office, and they're managing that and they're keeping it limited, but they are working as needed for people to come in where that's necessary. The rest of the slides I include because they have some kind of nice general information about some important HRA programs. They're not specific to Homebase, but they're there for your reference, and there are some links that I think can be really useful. On one of the slides, there is some more information about linking to the website, and we also include an email that goes directly to my unit. And so that's an option if you're not really, if you 3 weeks from now you have a question or you're not sure whether you should refer someone to Homebase, you can email there. We get those emails and then we would follow up accordingly to take action on whatever that inquiry is about. I think that we can talk and answer questions that people have, and Kate's on the call as well. So in terms of Access HRA and other programs that HRA offers, but I'd like to include this information here because I'm a big advocate for these systems. And so I like to promote them with people. And I think that that makes a lot of sense, especially now, because in terms of people managing public benefits and applying for benefits, that's been happening primarily through that web-based system. Some job centers with HRA have remained open, but the Access HRA has been a really important tool for people to manage their accounts. So I'm happy to jump to questions at this point versus further discussion, because we can focus. I'm sure people need some more detail on some of what I mentioned.
Great, thank you so much, Dana. We are going to just hear from our last speaker, and then we will go to questions. So Sia, if you want to go ahead and share your screen now with your slides.
I do. 1 second. I'm just pulling them up.
And Sia, I know that there's so much information to cover and we are nearing 10 o'clock. We want to make sure that we have questions.
Yeah,
are you able to stay a little past 10 or do you have a hard stop?
Oh, I can stay.
Okay, and Dana, are you able to stay a little past 10 for questions? Great, okay, thank you both so much. All right, let me see, let me stop sharing and then you should be able to go, there we go.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right, view, present. Okay. All right. So my name is Sia. I'm the campaign coordinator for Housing Justice for All, and we are a statewide coalition of over 100 organizations at this point that represent tenants, homeless New Yorkers, and public housing residents. And our goal is to change state law to strengthen tenants' rights and to end homelessness. So we are not providing direct service. We are doing organizing, and we are plugging people into a statewide network with the goal of changing policy. So I just want to name a little bit about the moment that we're in, that I'm sure you picked up on from the first two presenters. The New York State Legislature is reconvening next week. So we have an opportunity to get sort of a second bite at the apple. Like Aissatou described, there is a rent relief bill that the state legislature passed, but it's woefully insufficient. And it's also, in our mind, sets a good deal of bad public policy precedent. Because it locks people into a rent burden, and basically it only covers you up to the rent burden you previously were facing. So it's the state is subsidizing folks to still be at deep risk of eviction. I also want to name that, you know, the program is only open to apply for 2 weeks, which is not enough time. And at by 9:15 this morning, the website had already crashed and was down. And so now the first day of the precious 14 days that we have to apply is already, it's not working. So the state legislature is reconvening next week, and we need to pressure them to pass a strong housing recovery package as we are facing like this massive eviction tsunami. The Tenant Safe Harbor Act, which we know doesn't do enough because of the money judgments, the stuff that the first two speakers already spoke about. And again, the eviction moratorium has been very watered down by the governor. It's very confusing and will effectively end in August. So we are fighting to actually, instead of like trying to get access to these services, which are woefully insufficient, we are trying to win more services. I just wanted to say a couple things about who is being impacted by this crisis. 84% of homeless New Yorkers identify as Black or Latinx, and in the past week, it was announced that over 100 homeless folks have died in shelters from COVID-19. If you are in the shelter, you are unable to get access to life-saving medical support that you need, you're not able to socially distance, you're not able to just stay at home, which is pretty much everyone's best advice about COVID-19. So the housing crisis is a life or death situation for homeless New Yorkers. 1 in 5 Black women report being evicted at one point during their lifetime, and that has really cascading economic impacts. If you are evicted, that is going to be lifelong trauma for your children. It impacts your ability to learn, to hold down a job, stuff that y'all already know. And in the last 4 months, this is new data that just came out last week. But in the last 4 months, 51% of Black households in New York City report having missed at least 1 month of rent in the last 4 months, compared with just 6% of white households. So when we talk about housing courts reopening, we know who is going to be impacted by that. It's the same communities that are impacted by police violence, by COVID-19, and housing justice is really a racial justice issue. So what are we going to do about it? We have 3 bills that were just introduced last week in the state legislature that we need to win in order to address this crisis holistically. This is our blueprint for a COVID-19 housing recovery. And I'm going to talk more about what they are. 1 is the cancel rent bill. I'll say more about what that means. 2 is we want to pass a universal eviction moratorium for a full year to keep housing courts closed for a year. No eviction filings, no money judgment filings. Tenants would still be able to file filings against landlords for life-saving housing conditions and illegal lockouts. And then we want to support unhoused people in being urgently rehoused by passing the Housing Access Voucher Program, which is essentially like a state Section 8 program. Importantly, because it would be funded by state resources, undocumented people would be eligible to apply. The cancel rent bill. So the cancel rent bill cancels rent universally from March 7th for the duration of the COVID-19 crisis plus 90 days. So when we exit phase 4, there would be an additional 90 days or 3 months. It says it creates a small landlord hardship fund for small landlords, not-for-profit landlords, and public housing authorities that make up most of lost income to make up for lost income due to lost rent. So I want to speak about that for a second, because when we say cancel rent, a common misconception is that we're just asking people to not pay rent. That's not true. We think that if you can pay rent, you should, but if you're unable to pay rent, you shouldn't have to. And that because of the very, very, very complicated application processes that do not work, and because of the level of emergency, what we're actually saying is if you can't pay rent, no questions asked, your back rent will be canceled. Your landlord can't take you to court for the rent owed during this period. And so it's sort of giving folks that benefit of the doubt. But if the landlords can't maintain their buildings because of that, which we understand many cannot, landlords will be able to apply and go to the state and get resources. So essentially what the cancel rent bill does is it puts the onus on the landlord to prove hardship instead of the tenant. That is the main difference from a voucher program that were described earlier, and these like home-based programs that were described earlier. The goal is that the landlords are the ones who have to prove hardship rather than renters, because we know landlords have more options. They have lawyers, they have management companies, they have all of these resources available to them that make it easier for them to get through an application process. In addition to that, they have more stability, right? In this moment, landlords, by virtue of the fact that they own property, just have more stability and can probably handle a month or two trying to figure out what to do next, versus tenants who really cannot. And in this way, cancel rent is the only program that doesn't treat all landlords the same. So we know that there's a growing share of our homes that are owned by corporate landlords in New York City, like big private equity companies who are profiting off of this crisis. And so what cancel rent does is it says that resources in the state should be prioritized for renters and mom and pop landlords, not for Blackstone. If landlords opt into this hardship fund, they must open their books to prove hardship, freeze rents at the pre-COVID-19 level for 5 years, and abide by good cause eviction for 5 years. So we're asking landlords to opt into a 5-year regulatory agreement in exchange for accepting subsidy that goes with the unit. The second bill is an eviction, and this bill is sponsored by Senator Julia Salazar in the Senate and Yuli New in the State Assembly. The second bill we're supporting is this eviction moratorium bill. The eviction moratorium, like I said, prohibits eviction to commercial and residential tenants for the duration of the state of emergency plus a year. It prohibits courts from issuing a judgment of possession against tenants or a foreclosure. And it also prohibits filings. So the eviction moratorium that we have right now does not prohibit filings. This bill does. And we introduced this bill with State Senators Eleanor Myrie and Assemblywoman Karina Reyes. In addition to, the bill was written by the legal aid and legal services staff unions. So the workers in housing court, this bill really came out of workers in housing court who don't want to go to court because it is unsafe right now. And so it both prevents a mass eviction crisis that could lead to, and it prevents a public health crisis. As anyone who's been to housing court can tell you, it is not a place where folks really socially distance. And then our final bill is the Housing Access Voucher Program. This is a voucher program that prioritizes homeless New Yorkers who are living in shelters, who are living doubled and tripled up on couches, couch surfing, or in three-quarter houses. It gives homeless New Yorkers an immediate pathway out of shelters and off the streets and into and out of temporary hotel rooms. And so it's like a Section 8 voucher for folks who are experiencing homelessness. It's been introduced by Brian Kavanaugh and Steve Simbrowitz. And so those are the three bills. So what we're really trying to do here is pass a comprehensive housing package that prevents evictions, addresses back rent owed, and provides a permanent pathway to stable housing for homeless New Yorkers. The way that we're going to win them is by bringing more and more people into the movement, including you. We need to lobby the state legislature to get our housing allies in the legislature to take action right now. And we need mass action to emphasize the urgency of the moment. And so what that mass action looks like, some tenants are considering eviction blockades. So that will start with like big actions at housing court, solidarity actions, and folks start to go to housing court, bringing all of your neighbors and all of your community with you to really sort of humanize and dramatize the pain that is happening when people are facing eviction in this moment. So if that's something you want to show up at, if you want to show up at court in solidarity with to take action, not to provide legal support, to stand in support or picket outside to prevent evictions, you can sign up at this link, bit.ly/eviction defense, and you'll be contacted. That's like a rapid response action network by someone in your neighborhood. You can also call your state representatives and ask them to sponsor our 3-bill blueprint for a COVID recovery. That actually is the wrong link, so let me just fix this right now. It's case sensitive, so this is the right link. So if you go to bit.ly eviction free NY, that will directly connect you to, you basically put in your zip code, and when you put in your zip code, it'll say, here's your state assembly person, here's your state legislator, and here's your governor, and it will easily connect you to them and call them. You also have an option to email them. And then, if you live in a building and you can't pay the rent, or you think your neighbors can't pay the rent, you should get organized. For support, you can check out our organizing guide at bit.ly rent strike NY. That's a guide to getting organized in your building. It also gives you information about the history of rent strikes in New York, but you don't have to go on a rent strike to use this guide to organize. It basically gives you basic tenant organizing advice. And should your tenant association choose that you want a rent strike, it gives you some history about that as well, and advice and support. So that's it. That's what we've got going on. Again, I think it's very, very important that people get to services in this moment, but it's also important to understand that the services that are on offer are not good enough, and that millions and millions of people will lose their homes, even with all the access to the great services that we heard about in the first 2 presenters. So people just need stronger rights. We just need more supports to help folks pay their rent. We are in a housing crisis that COVID-19 did not create, but COVID-19 is making it worse. And I will stop there.
Great. Thank you so much, Sia. It's helpful in these really worrisome times to know that there's action happening and ways that we can get involved. So, all right, we will, I know that we are approaching 10 o'clock. I understand that this is a big topic. If people need to jump off, like I said, we're recording this. You can check out the recording later, but we are going to go a little bit late so that we can get to some of your questions. So, all right, so first question is for Aissatou. Is there legal representation for the tenants upon request in housing court? This person used to work in a home base in the Bronx, and legal services, legal aid, for example, was based on tenants' zip code. So is there legal representation for tenants in housing court?
Yes, from what I know now, the zip codes haven't really been the guidelines for this. They have been, I have had cases that I've had to represent individuals from all zip codes. So I do think that it's a case-by-case basis, but for now, zip code is not a barrier to getting free legal representation. I will say income still might be. So if someone has a higher income, they may not be eligible for our representation, but zip code, I don't think so. But a lot of people have been getting legal representation through court.
Great, thank you. Next question for Dana. I'm kind of lumping 2 questions together. First, can undocumented people receive support from Homebase? And also, do the heads of household need to have qualifying immigration statuses, or if the children are citizens / eligible for benefits, could the household receive assistance?
Yeah, I think that the second question kind of answered the first question. So there are some limits for Homebase. There has to be someone in the household with legal status for Homebase enrollment.
So anyone in the household must have legal status in order to...
Right. So they can work with them if there is legal status in the household. Yeah, so that's a simple answer.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so quick question for Sia. Can we get a follow-up on these bills if and when they are passed?
Yeah, of course.
All right, and I think if you join your campaign, you'll get email notification updates and things.
Yeah, absolutely. So the best way to sign up for email notifications is, wait, I'm trying to remember all the bit.lys.
Yeah.
If you sign up there, you'll get added to the email list.
Okay, great. And as a consortium, we'll do our best to also kind of share updates for that with you all. Is there a list of, also for C, is there a list of representatives to target for these bills? For example, representatives who might be important in decision-making with things?
Yeah, so it's really important to target, of course, the housing chair in both houses, so Brian Kavanaugh and Steve Simbrowitz. It's also important to target the finance chairs because these programs cost a lot of money. So in the Assembly, that's Helene Weinstein, and in the Senate, that's Liz Kruger. And then leadership, of course, are the biggest decision makers, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, Carl Hastie, and also your own representatives. Your own representatives need to hear from you. So wherever you live, that person is important, I guarantee it.
Great, thank you. For Aissatou, does the financial hardship proof need to be brought to housing court? How would a judge determine what constitutes this?
I would say no. So right now, there are no set standards that the judges are following. So I think this is the perfect opportunity to give them a standard. So I would say if someone has a court appearance and they can only make it over the phone, they can make the assertion that they are receiving some type of public benefit, or they can talk about the financial hardship. If the judge does ask for proof, that could maybe even be a text picture of something, having someone email the court a picture of your benefits card or your Social Security income letter. I would say that under no circumstances should someone go to court and actually do these things. Unfortunately, the court is not super helpful with making itself virtually accessible to tenants, but it's important that tenants not put their health in danger in order to prove these things. And if they do have an attorney, that attorney would be able to share that information virtually with the court.
Great. Question for Dana, or perhaps others from HRA that are on the call. Does applying for the new New York State Rent Relief Program, I think this is the HCR program, have any public charge implications?
I don't want to say that I feel confident 100% answering that. I don't know. I think it's a good question. I don't know if it would be seen as benefits as the same way as everything else. It seems to me like it could. And I don't know if, and so I think it's worth keeping in mind and maybe getting some further guidance. And I think, Kate, we could probably look into that a little bit at HRA, and it might also go to lawyers for their, legal opinion on it. I know that, there's been concern about accessing just basic public assistance as an issue. And so it is a federal program. So for whatever that's worth, but I wouldn't want to say yes or no definitively.
We can follow up on that. Aissatou, I don't know if you have any additional.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely would look into that some more. Yeah.
We're also happy to follow up on that. If there are specific clients, feel free to send us some of those cases. I can share an email address after this with you, Bonnie, or anyone else, and we'll make sure to follow up.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, another for Dana. Are you able to recommend resources for individuals who are already homeless but are not able to enter into the shelter system, or are staying with friends and do not have permanent housing?
Okay, well, that's a good question, because I think it's helpful for people to understand the distinction with Homebase. So when people are in shelter, they should get services through their shelter. And so Homebase can't enroll people who are in shelter. But if people are in the community, then they can pursue services with Homebase. And it would primarily be more about the eligibility criteria of risk of homelessness, income threshold, and need. Okay, so if somebody is doubled up, like what we referenced, doubled up, staying with somebody, they're in the community and they can go to Homebase for services. If somebody is street homeless, like literally living on the street, there's another division through Department of Homeless Services that's charged with that work. So Homebase is working with people in the community who are in some sort of housing. They don't do the outreach and the management of street homeless, and they don't enroll and serve clients who are in shelter who should be getting services through the shelter. But outside of that, there's not a requirement that you be in the community with your own lease. It's in the community. So I would say the only concern that comes up is that sometimes people think, okay, they can go to Homebase and get housing. So Homebase, unfortunately, doesn't have like a magic building of empty apartments that they can give to people when they come in. So they can look at the circumstances with that person and help them access whatever services might be available, and even try to, help them look at stabilizing that shared living experience, right? Because sometimes that's really the best thing to do, or the only thing to do, and maybe some financial resources, maybe some mediation, maybe helping the person get access to some other benefits will help make that situation more manageable or last longer.
Thank you. Okay, question for Sia. Is there a plan for a campaign towards the extreme amount of rent that is being charged in New York City throughout all boroughs, such as rent stabilization?
Yeah, so we, for many years, worked very, very hard on a campaign to strengthen and expand rent stabilization, and were successful last year in winning really transformative reforms to the state's rent stabilization laws. So thanks to those laws, it is now near impossible for the landlord to dramatically raise rents legally in between tenancies. There are still some things that we need to fix, particularly with the way that major capital improvements are calculated and applied. But it is, as of right now, if you live in rent stabilization, much, much harder for your landlord to both raise your rent, but also raise the rent. Say if like I move out and Bonnie moves in, Bonnie's rent will be about the same as my rent. So even if that's not having an immediate impact on the rent stabilized housing stock, it means two things. One, it means that we are gonna stop the loss and the decontrol of our rent stabilized apartments. And two, over time, rent is just gonna go up slower. So we expect that to have a stabilizing impact on the escalating rents in New York City for a long, long, long time. And in addition, it's already seen a lot of impacts. This is sort of weird to talk about now because of COVID, but in the first year from June 2019 through really March 2020, evictions dropped by about 40% across the state of New York because of the impacts of the rent stabilization laws. So tenants' rights are much stronger than they were 2 years ago. And even if that's not impacting rising rents immediately, we don't feel it immediately, over time, our rents are gonna go up much slower, and it will have a long time impact on the housing market. The second thing that we still need to do is there's two main things that we still need to do. One is we need to bring those protections to people who live in buildings with less than 6 apartments. So we know that lots and lots of low income and working class people live in unregulated apartment buildings, and we need to expand rent stabilization or good cause eviction protections with limits on rent increases to those buildings. So we have a bill that will do that in the state legislature right now. It's been sponsored by Julia Salazar. I didn't talk about it today, but I love to talk about it, and I'm happy to come back and do that again. The second thing that we need to do is we just need to build more socially controlled housing. So that means both investing in our public housing stock, but also investing in things like community land trusts, mutual housing associations, not-for-profit affordable housing that is run for community and neighborhood reasons and not-for-profit reasons. And that's going to take big investment at the state level.
Thank you very much. Aissatou, is Judge Mark's order of no evictions until further notice still in effect?
I would cross out until further notice and put until August 5th, because it's still in effect in that he hasn't changed that language specifically, but his most recent memo states that landlords can start actions and they don't need the landlord's attorneys do not need the additional proof that was required before. So I would, just to have a benchmark, I would say August 5th. And I would expect something to come around that time, hopefully, that provides some additional protections. But I'm wary of the until further notice language.
Okay. Dana, I have a question. Is there any help for those who are renting in a private house?
Sure. I mean, that goes to the same comment earlier, that if whatever the situation, if somebody's living in the community in the 5 boroughs, they can potentially obtain services through Homebase. So it doesn't matter what kind of setting it is. It doesn't necessarily, it's not just, you have to have a lease in this kind of building. Homebase has a much broader scope than that. So if, you know, people, I mean, much of what Homebase does is work on very high crisis situations, because unfortunately that's often the point at which people come to them. But it's not that they can't do things that are not quite fully at crisis state. So if somebody's having an issue or a concern, they can go to Homebase to obtain services to help look at how they can address that issue or concern. You know, sometimes people come to Homebase and Homebase will say, you know, come back to us once you have a court document, because that sort of helps them move things forward. So, but it doesn't mean that they can't help someone who says, this is my situation, I feel like there's a problem, I need some help negotiating it or looking at my options, or am I eligible for anything? And so it's okay for people to reach out to Homebase, especially now. I mean, we always encourage people to contact Homebase in advance and talk to them on the phone so they can schedule an appointment and get some information, because Homebase can help weed out wasting someone's time if they really don't think they'll be eligible or they want to refer them down a different path. Right now, obviously, everything's happening with a phone call first, right? There's no reason that somebody should be showing up at an office right now. I think you know, there might be a question about this, but if not, I want to say it. So I'll just tie in on this question that, and I think it's an important distinction to make, that Homebase doesn't directly run or manage any subsidies. Those are run by the city, the state, and the federal government. They are the conduit for assessment and application to some of the city subsidies. And so it's important for people to know that Homebase isn't setting the rules and making the decisions, but Homebase is contracted with HRA to provide services around housing stability in the community and avoiding homelessness. So they're the entity that people can come to if they're in the community to say, am I eligible for city FAPs? Am I eligible for FAPs? And then they are experts at the eligibility, and they will assess that and let people know. And if somebody in the community is eligible, they would give them the letter that that person can use as part of their housing search. And then they would be the entity that person would come back to submit their application. But sometimes people think, well, Homebase isn't giving me this. And it's not, the eligibility criteria is not set or determined by Homebase, and they can't change it. They're just the entity that does the community-based assessment and application.
Thank you. And for those, I know there were a few kind of specific questions and issues about contacting Homebase offices. So Kate put in the chat box a phone number and an email address to reach out to if you're having any issues or have other questions about how to access these services. You can go ahead and reach out to them directly.
Yeah, just to be clear about that, because I think Kate's speaking about like HRA benefits and services, but if somebody is trying to get information about Homebase and make a referral there, they can directly get the Homebase information on the HRA website, because those are all run by community-based organizations. So I don't want the DSS outreach team to get inundated with requests about how do I find a Homebase. On the HRA website, in my slides is a link to the page on the website that gives you all the locations, all the addresses, all the phone numbers. So people can do that directly through there or the 311. If they have a more general question about services or HRA programs, they should go to the outreach team. But just to find Homebase and make a referral, they don't need to do that.
There was one comment about having difficulty reaching, like just not getting any answer at a Homebase office in like Bushwick, Bed-Stuy specifically, and not being able to leave a message. So I don't know if that's something that
Yeah, I mean, we definitely want to know that. That's a concern because they are working remotely and we want those systems to work. So in that situation, it would be fine to email the prevention mail address that I put in my slides. But also if somebody did do that via the outreach email, it would be sent over to me. And then the best thing that people can do if they're reaching out to us is give us specific information, because we will be able to more readily follow up. So if we get an email saying, I couldn't reach anyone at Bushwick, there's not a lot that we can do to follow up. But if they say, Dana Guyet, who lives at this address with this zip code, is trying to enroll with Homebase, here's how she can be contacted, we can go directly to that Homebase provider and say, please reach out to this client. Or even if it's a service provider who says, here's my name and number, can somebody from this Homebase call me? Because then we have a direct link to them and we can connect in with the program, the Homebase program directly and make sure they make that call. And then we also want to know so that we can feedback something's not right, that someone can't get through and leave a message. And so that's also good information for us to have.
Great. All right, well, we are nearing 15 minutes past, so I just want to thank all of our panelists for staying extra and answering all these questions. There are a few that we did not get to. If it would be okay if we emailed those to you. Hopefully they're pretty basic questions and we can follow up. But we really thank you all for your time and sharing this vital information in what is a very kind of rapidly changing environment and really a scary time for the people that we serve. So thank you so much for your work and for sharing this information with our network. For everyone on the call, again, this is being recorded. We will have the recording probably within 2 days, and same with the slides and all the information that's been shared here will be shared with all of you. Please fill out the evaluation. I think, Harmony, if you want to throw that in the chat box again, or it'll be emailed out. That is really important for us to get feedback on what you all need and what we can do to better support you. Thanks very much. Stay well and take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.